Hey Sharath, thank you so much for joining in. We're
Not at
really
all.
glad to kind of have you as a part of this session. And folks, we are really excited to have Sharath with us. He is with Google in the middle of all the action. We've been using Google Pay, and I think he's kind of one of the people out there leading the efforts there. And before that, he was heading product at Myntra, and don't we love Myntra? So a lot of that credit goes to Sharath if you really love using Myntra. He was heading product at Myntra, and before that, he's kind of had stints at Twitter and a longer stint at Google before that. I think it's amazing to have someone who's had that much experience in product.
Thanks for having me here. I'm looking forward to it as well.
So just to get this conversation started, Sharath, I want to take you back, right, to more than 10 years ago when you actually entered into product, right? What was going through in your mind? Because back in those days, I don't think product was that well known, right? So how did you even chance about product management?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. In my case, I didn't even know I wanted to be a PM, and I wasn't even sure that I wanted to be one.
You're an accidental PM as well?
in many ways, yes, an accidental PM who just ended up loving the work. So this was around 2005 when I joined Google for my first stint. I actually joined them as an analyst, right? So like many people with an engineering or quantitative background, I have a degree in operations research. I ended up being a quant analyst, and every time I build some quantitative model, right, it could be a simulation, it could be a data exploration tool, and most of these were decision tools to make various business decisions, technical decisions, and so on. And by various accidents, I ended up building a tool at Google that I think the managers at Google used it all the way until 2011 to manage compensation planning or salary planning. For employees. So I did all of that stuff. I realized maybe I want to go become a software engineer at Google, and I went down that path. So I spoke to the CIO and a few other folks saying I'd like to interview to be an engineer. It was just pure dumb luck that the head of product happened to be in the room, a gentleman named Jonathan Rosenberg. And Jonathan looks at me and he says, "You probably don't realize this, but all these decisions you're making about how these little tools and products work, you're also acting as their PM, not just as the tech lead." And I was very glad that I had that opportunity. Because I then said, look, I'm not really sure. I'm more comfortable doing the engineering side of it. So he made me a deal. He said, 6 months, do PM, and then debate it. I'll figure out how to get you into engineering. I said, okay.
Fantastic. So tell me, what about the early challenges when you got in, right? Like for a newly minted PM, what were the initial set of challenges that you faced at that time?
I think the challenging pieces for me were one, like I said before, just getting comfortable with the ambiguity and the almost apparent obvious sense of lack of control, right? Your output in many ways as a PM is not something that a user directly touches, right? Your output is product requirements, product notes, all sorts of documents typically, right? Or maybe a diagram once in a while to go with it. But that is not what a user touches. The user touches something that has been brought to life by a piece of code. It could be a piece of hardware. And so that lack of control, getting to a sense of comfort with it and knowing how not to make that lack of control make you feel lost was probably one of the bigger challenges. That was probably the first line of conditioning of thinking about defining product goals very clearly and thinking about what's your role in making that thing happen, right? The last thing that I'd say about challenges as a PM was just keeping up with what happens around you in the world, right? Naturally, you'd enjoy PM if you're curious about how the world works and all of it. But I think as a PM, you also want to know how it all fits together and how you can build something with it, right? Figuring out your personal path to learning. And there's no perfect answer, right? I've asked PMs this question along my career. Various PMs have asked me that question, and none of us seem to have a fixed way of doing it. Each person has a distinct style. I think developing that style, getting comfortable with it, it's held me in good stead in the long run. So
Perfect. No, I think it's a very big deal, actually. If you don't have that mindset to be able to dig into the problems, understand those problems so very deeply, becomes even more difficult if you don't operate with that mindset. So let's talk about some products. We always keep talking about products which succeed, but we rarely talk about products which maybe have failed, right? And tell us about some of those examples, right, where what you went ahead with did not work out, and what were the learnings that you actually took out of that?
So early on in my career, we were working on what we used to call AdSense for X. In fact, my first product was working on various parts of AdSense. Two responsibilities. One was ensure that people can sign up for AdSense really smoothly and easily. So we built all sorts of automatic ways to approve applications and disapprove them and all of that. But AdSense for X was this idea that AdSense as a product would allow advertisers to put their ads into whatever medium they're at. And one of the things I got involved in was AdSense for games. And we had this idea that if you are a game developer, you would want to monetize by serving ads. And that could be one way for you to cut down the cost of doing the game. And if you could do this in a way that that's seamlessly blended into the game, it would be a great experience. It wouldn't feel like an interruption. And obviously, we could prototype this kind of stuff, right? We could prototype it in a very lab-like environment, and it all looks great, right? It's a racing game. You're going around a bend, and you actually see a display ad that fits into the game UI, right? You're playing, a racquetball game or a tennis game or something like that, and the stadium actually shows ads, and those ads are nothing but display units served by Google. And again, at one level, probably not the most complex product to imagine, but I think we grossly underestimated how complex it would be to serve those kinds of ads with min latency, and all sorts of dimensions and different aesthetic conditions inside a game, and the level of control that developers wanted. So for me, that was an interesting lesson in trying to spend more time on understanding what the technology can really do practically today. Versus today, it's not a surprise, right? There are enough of these things actually happening out there. I think this was one of those things where we just didn't think deeply enough about whether the technology could do what we wanted at that time.
All right. Fantastic. I think that's a wonderful example that you shared, Sharath. Thinking around usability and viability and feasibility, especially the feasibility part of it. Once the tech design is out, and understanding the non-functional requirements as well, and not just the functional requirements part of it, so very critical in product development. So, question which I get from a lot of people, like, should I join an early stage startup? Should I join a growth stage one, right? Should I join the big ones like the FANG companies, right? What would be your advice, especially for someone who is starting?
One, look for places where you can learn from people. Really, truly respect and enjoy the people you work with. Because product, like I said earlier, there's so much of it that is about working with people, and so much of it that is not formalized knowledge from textbooks, that picking the right team to work with matters a lot. So if you're going to a large company, go to one that has a reputation for building product talent, right? Don't go to one that's necessarily just a big brand. The second thing that you could optimize for, go into a domain that you're both passionate about and willing to build deep knowledge about.
Right.
That will actually keep you happy in the midst of building amazing stuff. And even though you might make the odd mistake on your own, you'll actually end up having a greater time doing that. And the last piece that I would say is go to places that have growth. Right. If choice was between a company that's stable and good and a company that's growing but chaotic, choose growth and chaos, because it just teaches you so many lessons. So I think these are three things I'd optimize for. Look for the right people and or look for the right domain, one that you'd enjoy building expertise in. Or go to a place that has crazy growth.
Absolutely. No, I think very rightly put. And for folks who are just kind of listening into this, take note of the fact that he did not mention compensation ever, right? And that's one of the things which I know early career folks get swayed by a lot, especially with what's happening in the tech ecosystem, because in the longer run, it just does not matter. The people who actually index or over-index on the learning have always found that those are the people who would kind of make a much bigger mark kind of going forward. So wonderful. So the next question here is, how do you understand the customer segment and their pain points deeply when you enter a new firm, totally different from where you were previously?
There's probably a few parts to it. One part is there is a lot you can learn from reading, from data, and don't ignore that. There's a lot of interesting stuff, any domain that you can read a ton about. For example, recently I've been asked to take responsibility for Google Pay in Japan. I don't speak Japanese. So I started doing a Duolingo course on Japanese. I've started reading the history of Japan. Just immerse yourself in your problem, because that's a culturally unique market, and that's part of what I learned. In House Trip, I did the same thing, trying to understand what is the European travel landscape like. Tons of reports, etc. Second thing, follow your users, right? Like talk to them, shadow them. It can feel very humbling. You could very well find yourself in the situation where you're sitting in a corner of a room ready to burst into tears because everybody is raining down on your product. But hear it, because if everything was perfect, there is no need for a PM. You only need a PM when there is more stuff to be built and more stuff to be done. And the last thing that I'd say is do things. Like no matter how far ahead you get in life, take some time in every new situation to figure out how things are done. Because I said earlier, as a PM, you don't do those things. But you're supposed to create the direction that all the people who are doing these things follow. Whether they're doing software development, they're doing design, they're writing marketing copy for you, creating campaigns, whatever it is. Sit and understand with them, because if you understand that, the velocity at which you can move is a lot higher. And this is going to be different from company to company, and no one method is right or wrong. I made a horrible mistake of imagining that because I came from Google, there is probably a secret sauce to building products Google style that always works. And I can tell you hands down that the Guardian, very different organization, but they figured out their own way of doing things. Every Wednesday afternoon, when the Guardian made a new software release, the site would actually go down for a brief few seconds. And there'd be about 30 minutes where all the editorial tools went offline. 1.5 years later, in December, we did 1,500 releases on the Guardian website, big and small. It's continuous delivery, right?
Wow.
And I think that journey of going from that place in 1.5 years to here, and seeing engineers, PMs who came from different backgrounds figure out how they do it. It was just great. And from that point, every place I've gone, and even within Google now, I realize at a more senior level, different parts of Google build product very differently. Some for very good reasons. You go to Nest, building hardware products. Come to Google Pay, building a software-driven product. But cloud, it's a different kind of software product. It's not a consumer software product. So everybody's methods are different, and don't underestimate how much you need to know and appreciate that. Because ultimately, these are the people with whom you're going to build everything that you do.
That empathy towards your stakeholders and the team members goes such a long way. What's the advice that you would give to these folks who are just about to start off on their professional careers?
Probably 3 pieces. Be curious. It goes a very long way into building good products, understanding how they work. The apocryphal story of the kid who always dismantles all the toys to figure out how they work. Try to maintain that kind of wonder for everything you come across. I think it makes a massive difference. The second one is, as much as product management in various spheres can become a very technical job, I think the most important skill, and probably the hardest one to kind of learn from a book, is how you work with very diverse sets of people. In fact, interestingly, if you can figure out how to do that well, it also helps you when you want to generate empathy for your users, right? Because if you can empathize with diverse people at work, diverse people in partner organizations and outside and so on, it's a good way to keep giving you that constant reminder. So I think learning to spend time and walk in the shoes of other people is a skill that the more you hone, the more successful you'll be as a PM. And the last thing I would say is take the definition of ownership as widely as you can. So the thing that reminded me recently when I went back to Google and I was looking at some old slides and I came across this from the search team. The Google search team used to have a thing that said, if the user can't find what they want on the internet, it's our problem. It seems like a reasonable way to describe search. But then there are a bunch of sub-bullets, right? If they don't know how to spell what they want, it's our problem. If they can't express it in the language that they know, it's our problem.
Right.
If the stuff they want to search doesn't exist on the internet, it's our problem. And in each of these sub-bullets, you can almost see an entire new Google product, right?
Yeah.
You can see Translate. You can see the auto-suggestion for spelling correction. You can see Google book search, patent search, blog search, all of these things.
Yeah.
And I was trying to reiterate this for some of the folks at Google Pay. And I was saying that, look, if the user doesn't know how to pay money online, even that is our problem. We've got to figure out how to solve it for them, right? We got to assume, go figure it out, and then you can use our product. And I think that's an extreme form of ownership of saying, no matter what it is that's stopping the user, I'll figure out a solution to it. The thing I love about that is it actually gives birth to new products, right? Like new products, new technologies.
I think the broader you define that outcome, the more opportunities you get. Fantastic. So thank you so much, Sharath. I think it was lovely chatting with you as always. Wonderful insights.
Thanks, Arvind. It was a fantastic experience, and all the best to everyone at NextLeap. I hope you folks end up building great, fulfilling careers in product. Best of luck.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Sharath.
Through the next few years of your career, you will see a lot of managers. Some of them would be very good, some of them would be very bad. Learn from both sets of managers. When you take care of the people for the right reasons, right? Regardless of where your team is, regardless of where you are as an executive, the bond will still exist.